Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey back to the ancient world, to a time when one man, Alexander the Great, changed the course of history. Picture yourself standing on the edge of a vast battlefield, dust swirling around your feet as the sounds of clashing armies ring in the air. You probably won't survive this, at least, not in the sense you're used to, but for now, let's take it slow. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing where everyone's at across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine you're in the small, vibrant kingdom of Macedon around 356 BCE. It's a world where power is defined by the sword, where rulers carve their names into the earth with iron, and where the future is often won or lost on the battlefield. The sounds of horse hooves, the clatter of shields, and the sharp commands of leaders echo through the air as we begin the story of a young prince who would one day become a legend. In a modest palace in Pella, the capital of Macedon, a child named Alexander is born. The world around him is one of constant political tension and war, but also a place where intellectual pursuit, military training, and the weight of royal duty collide. His father, King Philip II of Macedon, is a brilliant military strategist and the man responsible for reshaping the Macedonian military into a formidable force. Yet, Alexander's story begins not on a battlefield but in the quiet, rich halls of knowledge. His education is first and foremost guided by one of the greatest minds of the era, Aristotle. Aristotle, known for his works on philosophy, science, and logic, isn't exactly someone you would expect to be tutoring a future conqueror. Yet, the philosopher instills in the young prince a sense of curiosity, a love for learning, and a respect for knowledge. He teaches Alexander about everything from ethics to biology, embedding a deep-seated desire in the young prince to explore and understand the world beyond Macedon. In fact, it's said that Alexander developed a fascination with the works of Homer, particularly the Iliad. One of his most cherished possessions was a copy of this epic, which he carried with him throughout his campaigns. The themes of bravery, honor, and adventure spoke to him in a way that would later shape his own quest for glory. But, of course, no matter how much you study philosophy, sometimes it's the world of war that calls you. By the time he's in his teens, Alexander is already beginning to flex his military muscles. At just 16 years old, while his father is off conquering other lands, Alexander is left to govern Macedon. And what does the young prince do? He doesn't just sit idle. Instead, he leads a successful campaign against the Thracians, a neighboring tribe that had been causing trouble. To make things even more impressive, Alexander does this while his father is away, earning the admiration of his soldiers and proving his military capabilities at a remarkably young age. This experience is more than just a conquest, it's a moment of self-discovery for Alexander. He begins to realize that his destiny lies not in sitting on a throne and ruling from afar, but in leading his people to greatness through battle and conquest. The stage is set, and the foundations of Alexander's ambitions are laid. At this point, you might be wondering, what exactly makes a leader like Alexander so special? What is it about him that draws people to him, and why do so many historians look back on his life as a unique blend of brilliance and ambition? Well, part of the answer lies in his ability to inspire loyalty and devotion in his men. But more importantly, Alexander possesses an almost preternatural gift for understanding warfare. Scientists still argue whether natural-born leadership can be defined by specific traits, or if it's a matter of circumstance and environment. But in Alexander's case, there's no denying the influence of his father's teachings combined with his own natural talents. King Philip had already transformed Macedon into a military powerhouse, creating new formations and strategies that put his enemies on the defensive. But it's his son who would take these innovations and elevate them to legendary status. And so, the stage is set. The young prince is destined for greatness, and the world is about to change forever. In the coming years, Alexander will lead his armies across continents, defeating powerful empires and leaving behind a legacy that still echoes through history today. But first, there's one crucial thing that stands in his way: his father. King Philip is still alive, still king of Macedon, and still a dominant force in the region. But as Alexander watches his father grow older, he begins to sense an opening, a chance to carve out his own legacy and claim the throne for himself. And so, in the year 336 BCE, tragedy strikes. King Philip is assassinated. Whether it was a political plot or a personal vendetta doesn't matter. What matters is that Alexander, only 20 years old, suddenly finds himself thrust onto the throne of a vast, growing empire. He is young, untested, and perhaps, just a bit unsure. Yet, he wastes no time in asserting his authority. He quickly eliminates any opposition, securing his position and setting his sights on something much greater, the conquest of the known world. The world is on the brink of war, and Alexander is ready to take the first step toward greatness. But before we march forward with him, let's pause for a moment to take in what's about to unfold. A new era is about to begin. A small, isolated kingdom will soon find itself the center of an empire stretching across 3 continents. And a young, ambitious prince will become one of the most legendary figures in history. As you settle into the narrative, imagine standing with Alexander at the head of his army, a young man full of ambition and promise, staring across the battlefield with the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. With each step, you can feel the vibrations of the ground beneath you, the anticipation building in the air like a storm about to break. But before Alexander could conquer the world, he first had to forge a weapon that could carve his name across continents, the Macedonian army. Now, the Macedonian army is no small feat, far from it. Alexander inherited a force that his father, King Philip II, had painstakingly shaped into a finely tuned military machine. Philip's reforms were revolutionary, transforming the Macedonian military into a more cohesive, flexible, and formidable force than the world had ever seen. So, before we dive into Alexander's glorious conquests, let's first explore the backbone of his empire, the very army that would carry him across the known world. Imagine a line of soldiers in their shimmering bronze armor, the sun glinting off their spears, standing in a formation so tight that they seemed more like a single, undivided entity than individuals. You can almost hear the sharp commands ringing out across the field, the disciplined synchronization of their movements, and the precise coordination that made them such an unstoppable force. The Macedonian phalanx, as it was known, was a key element of this military machine. It was a formation of soldiers armed with long spears, called sarissas, that could stretch up to 18 feet long. The phalanx was a wall of sharpened steel, a mass of men working in unison, pressing forward with the relentless force of an advancing tide. As each soldier in the front ranks engaged the enemy, those behind them, armed with longer sarissas, would push through, offering support and maintaining a steady advance. It was an unyielding, powerful formation that, once perfected, was nearly impossible to break. But it wasn't just the phalanx that made the Macedonian army formidable. It was also the combination of cavalry and infantry, working together like a perfectly coordinated symphony. The cavalry, particularly the companion cavalry, was a key element of Alexander's strategy. These cavalrymen were elite warriors, mounted on horses and armed with short lances and swords. They were fast, highly maneuverable, and devastating in battle. With their speed and precision, they could exploit weaknesses in the enemy's lines, breaking through and creating chaos behind enemy lines. One of the most impressive features of the Macedonian military, however, was its logistics. Alexander's army was known for its ability to move quickly and efficiently across vast distances. While other armies struggled with supply lines and coordination, the Macedonian army was able to march thousands of miles without faltering. The soldiers were trained not only in combat but also in the art of living off the land, foraging and scavenging as they moved. This allowed them to remain self-sufficient, even in the most difficult terrain. And it's not just about physical prowess. The Macedonian army was also highly strategic. There's a famous saying attributed to Alexander himself: "I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep, I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion." This reflects the kind of leadership that Alexander inherited from his father. Philip had instilled in his troops a sense of discipline and loyalty, but Alexander took it to the next level. His ability to inspire his soldiers was unmatched. He was not just a king or a commander, he was one of them. He fought alongside his men, sharing their hardships, their victories, and their defeats. His presence on the battlefield was a rallying point, a beacon that guided his soldiers through even the darkest moments. Scientists still argue whether it was the sheer brilliance of Alexander's tactics or the unrelenting discipline of the Macedonian army that made them so effective. Some historians argue that Alexander's genius in battle was the result of his ability to adapt to changing circumstances, while others point to the meticulously planned strategies that Philip had laid down long before his son took the reins. But what's undeniable is that the combination of these factors made the Macedonian army a force to be reckoned with. It's important to understand that the Macedonian military was not simply about brute force. It was about finesse, precision, and adaptability. When you're facing enemies as varied and powerful as the Persians, the Egyptians, and the Indian kingdoms, you need more than just muscle. You need brains. Alexander's ability to read a battlefield, anticipate enemy movements, and adapt his strategies on the fly was legendary. But before Alexander could prove his brilliance on the world stage, there was one final step. His army, despite all its power and discipline, needed to be united under one banner. There were always factions within the ranks, rivalries, and dissension. Yet, the young prince was determined to weld his army into a single, unified force, one that would follow him through the harshest deserts, across raging rivers, and into some of the most legendary battles in history. He needed not just soldiers, but followers, comrades who believed in his vision and would march with him through fire and blood. So, in 336 BCE, with his father's assassination fresh in the air and the Macedonian army under his command, Alexander took the first step toward becoming the greatest conqueror the world had ever known. He wasn't just fighting for glory, he was fighting for the future. His ambition wasn't limited by borders or kingdoms, it was boundless, stretching across the entire known world. And with that ambition came an army, the greatest army the ancient world had ever seen. As you visualize this powerful military machine, consider the incredible sense of camaraderie that must have existed among those men. The soldiers who marched under Alexander's banner weren't just following orders, they were part of something much larger than themselves. And when you hear the thundering of hooves in your imagination, you'll understand that every clash of swords and every victory on the battlefield was not just about territory or conquest. It was about forging a legacy that would endure through the ages. The sun begins to rise over the rugged, mountainous terrain. You can feel the heat of the day already pressing down on your skin, as dust kicks up with every movement of the massive army below. Imagine standing on the hillsides with Alexander, surveying the land before him, his eyes sharp and calculating. Ahead of him lies the first true test of his military prowess, the Battle of the Granicus River. The fate of his future empire depends on the outcome of this first confrontation with the Persian Empire. It's time to see if the dreams of his father, and his own ambitions, can be realized. The year is 334 BCE, and Alexander's march toward Asia Minor has brought him to the banks of the Granicus River, where a large Persian army lies in wait. At first glance, it might seem like a simple river crossing, but for Alexander, it's much more than that. It's an opportunity to prove himself and to send a message to his enemies. He's not just any young king, he's the son of Philip II, and he intends to carry on his father's legacy by defeating the might of Persia, a power that has stood for centuries. The Persian army, numbering around 20,000 strong, has been waiting for this moment. They are confident. They have the advantage of numbers, a position on higher ground, and the protection of the river. The Macedonian army, however, is much smaller, only around 35,000 men, but what they lack in size, they make up for in precision and discipline. This is a battle of tactics, of movement, of speed. The Macedonian army, under the leadership of Alexander, is prepared to turn the Persians' advantage into a fatal flaw. As the battle unfolds, you find yourself swept into the action. You can hear the shouts of men, the clash of swords, and the sharp thuds of spears striking shields. It's a scene of organized chaos. Alexander, ever the tactician, has a plan. He knows that his strength lies in the ability to strike fast and hard, to break through the Persian lines before they can properly organize their defenses. Alexander's first move is one of boldness. He leads a direct charge at the Persian right flank, aiming to break through their lines. The river proves to be more of an obstacle than he anticipated, with the soldiers struggling to navigate its swift currents and slippery banks. But Alexander's personal courage leads the way. His armor gleams as he rides at the head of his forces, leading them into the fray without hesitation. The Persians, taken aback by the audacity of the charge, scramble to adjust. But Alexander's speed and focus are overwhelming. His cavalry, led by his trusted companion cavalry, rushes forward with such force that the Persian right flank begins to crumble. The battle is intense, but within a few hours, Alexander's forces have made significant inroads into the Persian lines. The Persian forces, unable to withstand the Macedonian assault, begin to retreat. It's here, amid the carnage, that we begin to see the true genius of Alexander as a commander. He doesn't simply rely on the strength of his army, he also knows how to manipulate the battlefield, using speed, terrain, and psychology to break his enemies. While the Persian generals attempt to rally their forces, Alexander keeps pressing, making sure that every move is calculated to create confusion and disorder in the enemy ranks. Now, let's take a brief step back. You might be wondering, what is it about Alexander that allows him to lead with such certainty and precision? Some historians say that his understanding of warfare was not just theoretical, it was born out of practice. From a young age, Alexander had been tutored in the art of war by his father, who had already reformed the Macedonian military. But more than that, Alexander had a natural ability to read the battlefield, to see what his enemies might do next and how to counter it. It's not just a question of intelligence, either. Alexander had an inherent charisma that made his soldiers trust him implicitly. He fought alongside them, showing them that he was not just a king commanding from the back, but a leader willing to risk his life for the success of his mission. His personal bravery in battle became legendary. He was never one to hide behind his soldiers. Instead, he would often place himself in the thick of the action, setting an example for his men and gaining their loyalty in the process. Scientists still argue whether such qualities are inherent in great leaders, or if they can be cultivated through experience. Some studies suggest that the most successful military leaders have an ability to remain calm under pressure, which is something that Alexander certainly demonstrated during the battle. He was able to assess the situation, make quick decisions, and maintain control of the battlefield even as chaos raged around him. As the battle rages on, Alexander's forces continue to press the attack. The Persians, realizing they can't hold their ground, begin to retreat in disarray. Alexander doesn't let up. He pushes his soldiers hard, making sure to exploit every opportunity for victory. The battle ends in a decisive Macedonian win, with the Persian forces routed and forced to retreat. It's a victory that would set the tone for Alexander's entire campaign. But this isn't just a military success, it's a psychological one, too. With the victory at Granicus, Alexander has sent a clear message: he is not to be underestimated. The Persian Empire, the most powerful empire in the world at the time, has been humbled. And now, as you stand beside Alexander, looking at the aftermath of the battle, you can almost feel the weight of the future upon his shoulders. This is only the beginning. From here, the world is his to conquer. The victory at Granicus is the first step in a series of triumphs that will carry Alexander across the ancient world, from Asia Minor to Egypt, to Persia itself, and even to the far reaches of India. But as he looks over the battlefield, it's clear that Alexander knows this: victory alone is not enough. He will need to fight, to adapt, and to keep pushing forward if he is to achieve his vision. But for now, the moment belongs to Alexander. He's proven his worth, and his army has proven its might. The victory at Granicus has set the stage for what will come next, a series of battles that will test his leadership and skill in ways that even he can't yet imagine. As you stand in the aftermath of the Battle of Granicus, the victory feels almost surreal. The dust is still settling, the cries of the wounded are slowly fading, and the Persian forces have retreated, leaving the battlefield empty save for the Macedonian warriors. But Alexander isn't basking in the glory of his first major victory. No, he's already looking forward to the next challenge, the next step in his journey toward the Persian heartland. This time, it's a siege, a much different kind of battle than the open-field confrontation of Granicus. The city of Halicarnassus, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, stands as a symbol of resistance. It's a strategic stronghold, a place where the Persians have fortified their defenses and set up a formidable position. To conquer this city, Alexander will need more than just brute force. He will need every ounce of military innovation he can muster. As you watch from a distance, the scene unfolds like something out of an ancient war epic. Imagine the massive walls of Halicarnassus, towering above you, almost daring anyone to try and breach them. The city is built on a strategic peninsula, making it an even tougher target. The surrounding waters are full of enemy ships, and the land is dotted with traps and fortifications meant to repel any would-be invaders. This is the kind of challenge that would make most commanders hesitate, but not Alexander. He has already proved himself a brilliant tactician, and this siege will be no exception. The Macedonian army, with its famed phalanx and cavalry, is well equipped for a direct assault. But Alexander knows that the key to victory here isn't simply overwhelming force, it's strategy. He needs to outsmart the defenders of Halicarnassus, to make them believe that they're in control, only to have them realize too late that the battle is lost. So, Alexander begins by cutting off supplies to the city. He surrounds it, ensuring that no reinforcements can come in from the outside. The defenders, isolated and starving, begin to feel the pressure. But Alexander knows that just starving them out isn't enough. He needs to break the will of the defenders, to make them doubt their ability to hold out. To do this, he must outthink and outmaneuver them at every turn. One of the most brilliant aspects of this siege is Alexander's use of technology. He has his engineers build a series of siege engines, massive battering rams, catapults, and towers, that can breach the city walls. But what's even more remarkable is his use of naval tactics. While the land forces press the walls, Alexander also sends ships to blockade the harbor, preventing any escape or reinforcements from coming by sea. He's attacking the city on multiple fronts, ensuring that the defenders have no way out. The battle isn't without its difficulties. Halicarnassus is a well-defended city, and the defenders are no pushovers. They fight fiercely, and for a time, it seems that the siege might drag on longer than expected. But Alexander is relentless. He continues to press the attack, using every advantage at his disposal. He orders the construction of massive siege towers, some of which are tall enough to reach over the city's walls, allowing his soldiers to rain arrows and projectiles down on the defenders below. He also builds ramps and earthworks, steadily advancing his forces closer and closer to the walls. As the days pass, the defenders of Halicarnassus begin to feel the weight of their situation. Their food supplies are dwindling, their morale is fading, and their hope is slipping away. They attempt desperate sallies, out-of-the-wall raids, to disrupt the Macedonian forces, but Alexander is always a step ahead. His discipline and planning keep his men focused, and he's able to repel each counterattack with precision. Finally, after several weeks of intense fighting and continual pressure, the walls of Halicarnassus begin to show signs of wear. The defenders, exhausted and demoralized, begin to give ground. Eventually, the Macedonian army breaks through, and the city falls. Alexander's victory here is not just a military one, it's a testament to his ability to think beyond the battlefield. He has not only overcome the physical defenses of Halicarnassus, but he has also broken the spirit of its defenders. It's worth noting that Halicarnassus wasn't just a city, it was home to one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the tomb of the Persian satrap Mausolus. While Alexander didn't destroy the monument, the fall of the city marked the beginning of the slow unraveling of Persian influence in Asia Minor. With the city's fall, Alexander has proven that no stronghold is beyond his reach. He is more than a conqueror, he's a master of siege warfare, a leader who knows how to use strategy and psychology as much as his military might. Some scholars argue that Alexander's real genius wasn't just in his military conquests, but in his ability to adapt and innovate. By the time he reaches Halicarnassus, he has already taken his father's military reforms to new heights. He is more than just a soldier, he is a brilliant strategist and a leader who inspires loyalty in his men. But his tactics are not always without controversy. Some historians debate whether his reliance on deception and psychological tactics was ethical, or whether it was simply the ruthless pragmatism of a conqueror willing to do whatever it takes to win. Scientists still argue whether these psychological aspects of warfare are as significant as the physical. Can the mind really be as powerful a weapon as the sword? Alexander's actions at Halicarnassus suggest that, for him, the answer is yes. He used not only his military strength but also his ability to manipulate the emotional and mental landscape of his enemies. And in doing so, he forged the path to his next major conquest. As the Macedonian soldiers march away from the fallen city of Halicarnassus, you can feel the tension ease. The city is a victory, yes, but it is also a stepping stone. With each conquest, Alexander's reputation grows, and the weight of the Persian Empire's collapse becomes ever more apparent. He is no longer just a young king. He is a force of nature. And the world is beginning to take notice. With the fall of Halicarnassus behind him, Alexander stands at a crossroads, looking out over the ancient Persian Empire, which is vast and rich, its power rooted deep in history. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the kind of tension that only comes before something monumental happens. Alexander's next target is not just another city or outpost. It is the heart of the Persian Empire itself. The Battle of Issus awaits. The year is 333 BCE, and you find yourself with Alexander as he prepares for what will become one of the defining moments of his life. Ahead of him lies the Persian king Darius III, an enemy whose vast forces dwarf Alexander's own. It's a battle of unprecedented scale, one that will determine not just the fate of a region but the course of history itself. For Alexander, this is no longer just about ambition. It's personal. Darius, who has underestimated him for far too long, is about to learn just how formidable Alexander really is. As the Macedonian forces march toward Issus, you can feel the weight of anticipation building, the thrum of an army on the move. The air is thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and the metallic tang of blood. The soldiers are ready. They've seen what Alexander can do, and they believe in him. The Persian army, meanwhile, waits just ahead, camped along the narrow coastal plain near the river Panaris. Darius' forces number around 100,000, a staggering force that would make most commanders hesitant to fight. But not Alexander. When you think of ancient battles, it's easy to imagine a sprawling field, with warriors locked in a chaotic, swirling melee. But Issus is different. The terrain is narrow, with mountains flanking one side and the sea on the other. It's a choke point, a bottleneck that leaves little room for maneuvering. This is where Alexander's tactical genius shines. His forces may be smaller, but he knows how to use the land to his advantage. Alexander begins by positioning his troops strategically, knowing that the Persians, despite their superior numbers, will be forced into a tight space where their strength is diluted. He places his infantry in the center, with his cavalry on the wings, ready to strike at any weakness in the Persian lines. Darius, on the other hand, places his elite cavalry on his left, hoping to overpower the Macedonian right wing and split the army in two. But what Darius doesn't realize is that Alexander isn't going to give him that opportunity. As the battle unfolds, you can hear the pounding of hooves, the crack of arrows slicing through the air, and the clash of metal as soldiers fight tooth and nail. It's a brutal affair, the kind of battle where every second counts, where one wrong move could spell disaster. Alexander leads from the front, riding at the head of his companion cavalry, his eyes locked on the Persian left flank. He knows that breaking through here will disrupt Darius' entire strategy. The Persian cavalry, though powerful, are spread thin, and Alexander's forces are fast and organized. The Macedonian cavalry, with their superior mobility, quickly overwhelm the Persian horsemen, driving them back and creating chaos within the Persian ranks. Meanwhile, Alexander's infantry is locked in a brutal struggle with the Persian foot soldiers. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long sarissas and disciplined ranks, presses forward with relentless force. The Persians try to hold their ground, but the Macedonian soldiers are too well coordinated. Slowly, inexorably, the Macedonian lines push through, and the tide begins to turn. Darius, seeing the tide of battle shifting, makes a crucial mistake. He orders his chariot, drawn by horses, to charge through the Macedonian lines in a desperate attempt to break their resolve. But this move only hastens the collapse of his army. The Macedonian soldiers, who are used to such tactics, simply step aside and let the chariot pass. It's a moment of frustration for Darius, who realizes too late that Alexander has outmaneuvered him. By the end of the battle, the Persian forces are in full retreat. Darius himself flees the field, abandoning his army and leaving his troops to fend for themselves. The Macedonian forces, though outnumbered, have achieved a decisive victory. You can almost hear the roar of the soldiers as they claim the battlefield, their cries echoing across the land. This is the moment when Alexander's legend begins to solidify. He is no longer just a young king with potential, he is the conqueror of Persia, and the world knows it. But what is it that makes Alexander's victory at Issus so remarkable? It's not just the sheer scale of the battle or the numbers involved. It's the way Alexander manages to turn the tide in his favor, to use his knowledge of terrain, his understanding of human nature, and his ability to inspire his troops to fight with unmatched ferocity. He has once again demonstrated his ability to read the battlefield, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to seize victory from the jaws of a much larger force. It's important to note that this victory didn't just give Alexander a strategic advantage, it also served as a psychological blow to the Persian Empire. Darius, who had viewed Alexander as little more than a nuisance, was forced to flee in disgrace. This moment of defeat, of humiliation, would haunt the Persian king for the rest of his life. It would also serve as a rallying cry for the Macedonian forces, who now saw themselves as invincible, capable of defeating even the most powerful empire in the world. Scientists still argue whether the key to Alexander's success was his strategic brilliance or the loyalty of his men. Some historians suggest that it was his ability to motivate and inspire his soldiers, to make them believe in their own invincibility, that allowed him to consistently win against overwhelming odds. It's a fascinating debate, whether it was the psychology of leadership or the power of military tactics that truly set Alexander apart. For now, though, the victory at Issus stands as a testament to the power of Alexander's vision, his tactics, and his unyielding determination. The Persian Empire, once thought to be unstoppable, has been dealt a crushing blow, and the stage is set for Alexander's continued march toward greatness. As you stand with Alexander in the aftermath of the battle, watching the Persian forces scatter and retreat, you can almost hear the whispers of the future. This victory is only the beginning. Soon, the entire Persian Empire will fall, and Alexander will be known as one of the greatest conquerors in history. The world is his to shape, and his legend is just beginning to unfold. The dust has barely settled from the Battle of Issus, yet already, you can feel the tension shift. The battle may have been won, but the war is far from over. With Darius fleeing the field, Alexander's next challenge lies ahead, not just in defeating his enemies but in holding the immense territory he has conquered. The Persian Empire still looms large, and Alexander must continue to push forward if he's to cement his place in history. The city of Tyre stands in his path, a city that will prove to be one of the most difficult sieges of his entire campaign. Imagine the scene before you. The coastal city of Tyre is a jewel of the ancient world, perched on a small island just off the mainland of Phoenicia. It is protected by massive walls, the kind that seem to touch the sky. Tyre has long been a major trading hub, rich in resources, and it is strategically located on the Mediterranean coast. Its harbor is one of the busiest in the ancient world, and its fortifications are nearly impenetrable. Alexander, however, isn't one to be intimidated by impossible odds. This will be no easy task. The siege of Tyre is different from anything Alexander has faced before. Unlike the open field battles, or even the siege of Halicarnassus, Tyre is an island city. To breach its walls, Alexander will have to overcome not just the city's defenders, but the natural barrier of water that separates the city from the mainland. The challenge here isn't just military, it's logistical. Alexander's first step is to build a causeway, a massive, mile-long bridge made of wood, stone, and earth, connecting the mainland to the island. It's an engineering marvel, but building it is no small feat. The defenders of Tyre know what Alexander is up to, and they're determined to stop him. As you stand on the shores, watching the construction of this causeway, you can feel the tension mounting. Imagine the sounds of laborers at work, the creaking of timber, the movement of stones being hauled into place. It's a massive undertaking, and the Tyrians are doing everything they can to slow the process. From the safety of their walls, they launch arrows, fire flaming projectiles, and hurl large stones at the Macedonian workers. But Alexander is relentless. His forces press forward, constructing the causeway under the cover of their own artillery. The siege lasts for months. Each day, the Macedonian forces grow closer to their goal, inching toward the walls of Tyre. But every day, the defenders retaliate with brutal attacks, sending waves of troops to destroy the causeway, hoping to delay Alexander's progress. They know that if they can prevent him from reaching the city, they'll win. But Alexander is no ordinary leader. He understands that time is on his side. Eventually, the defenders will wear down, and the pressure will break them. The most iconic moment of the siege happens when Alexander's engineers, using his guidance, finally complete the causeway. It allows his army to bring siege towers and battering rams right up to the walls of the city, and it's the final step in breaking Tyre's defenses. The Macedonian forces now have a direct route to the city, and the Tyrians are running out of time. Desperation sets in. In a final, futile attempt to stop the inevitable, the defenders launch one last counterattack, this time with the help of their navy. They send ships filled with troops to attack the causeway, hoping to break it before the Macedonian forces can capitalize on their hard work. But Alexander, ever the tactician, has already anticipated this move. His forces are waiting for the attack, and they repel it swiftly, securing the causeway and finally breaking Tyre's last line of defense. With the causeway now in place, Alexander's forces bring their siege engines to bear on the walls, hammering away until finally, after months of relentless pressure, the city falls. It's a hard-earned victory, and the people of Tyre know it. The Macedonian soldiers, hungry for victory, breach the city's walls and take control. But there's no jubilation here, just a sobering reminder of the cost of conquest. The city is sacked, its citizens are either killed or enslaved, and the harbor is under Macedonian control. Alexander's strategy, his will, and his relentless pursuit of victory have brought him another triumph. But this victory is more than just a military one. It is a message to the rest of the ancient world. Tyre, a city thought to be invincible, has fallen. Its defenses, once considered unbreachable, have been overcome. And now, as you stand beside Alexander, watching the remnants of the city burn, you realize that this siege is the culmination of more than just military might. It is a testament to Alexander's willpower, his ability to adapt, and his willingness to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal. Some historians argue that the siege of Tyre was one of Alexander's greatest achievements, not just because of the difficulty of the task, but because of his use of innovation and psychology in warfare. By building the causeway, he turned the very geography of Tyre into an asset, and by maintaining his patience throughout the siege, he showed the kind of resolve that few commanders in history can match. Scientists still debate whether Alexander's success at Tyre can be attributed to his genius or to sheer luck. Some suggest that it was his ability to motivate his soldiers and keep them focused on the task at hand that allowed him to overcome such formidable odds. Others argue that it was his ability to think outside the box, to devise unconventional strategies, that made him such a successful commander. Whatever the reason, there's no denying that the siege of Tyre marked a turning point in Alexander's campaign. Now, with Tyre under his control, Alexander's forces have access to the Mediterranean. The Persian navy is no longer a threat, and the route to Egypt is open. As you watch the aftermath of the siege unfold, it's clear that Alexander has secured not only a physical victory but a psychological one as well. The world now knows that Alexander the Great cannot be stopped. And as you stand beside him, looking out over the Mediterranean horizon, you know that there's more to come. The world is still waiting to be conquered, and Alexander is just getting started. The sound of the sea crashes against the newly conquered city of Tyre as Alexander and his army look out across the waters. With the siege now behind them and the city securely in their hands, the Macedonian king begins to turn his eyes toward his next major conquest, Egypt. But before we move on to the conquest of Egypt, let's pause for a moment to take in just how important this moment is. Alexander has already defeated the mighty Persian Empire in multiple battles. He's established himself as a force that can no longer be ignored. Now, with Tyre fallen, the route to Egypt is wide open. The world is Alexander's to take. Imagine standing at the edge of the Mediterranean, feeling the cool breeze on your face, the faint scent of salt water in the air. You can hear the sounds of the sea, waves crashing against the shores of Tyre, the creak of ships in the harbor. The land before you stretches to the east, and in that direction lies Egypt, a land of rich history, divine kingship, and strategic importance. Alexander knows that Egypt, one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the ancient world, will be a vital part of his empire. As the army makes its way into Egypt, you can almost feel the heat rising from the sand, the scorching sun beating down relentlessly. The desert stretches out in every direction, with nothing but barren land for miles. Yet Alexander marches forward with unshakable confidence. The Egyptians, who have heard of his victories in Asia Minor and Syria, are waiting for him. But they're not preparing for battle. Instead, they're preparing to greet him as a liberator. Now, you might be wondering why Alexander faces no resistance from the Egyptians. After all, this is a powerful civilization with a long history of fighting off invaders. Well, the answer lies in Egypt's current situation. At this time, the Egyptian people are under the control of the Persians, and they've grown tired of their Persian rulers. The Persians, though powerful, have failed to win the hearts of the Egyptians. Alexander, on the other hand, presents a much more appealing alternative. He is viewed as a liberator, someone who will free Egypt from the oppressive grip of the Persian Empire. When Alexander arrives in Egypt, he is greeted with open arms. The people, eager to throw off the Persian yoke, welcome him as their new ruler. The city of Memphis, once a powerful center of Egyptian culture, falls without a fight. Alexander is hailed as Pharaoh, and the Egyptians, who once revered their own gods and kings, now see Alexander as a divine figure. It's an extraordinary moment in history. The conqueror of the Persian Empire has not only defeated his enemies on the battlefield, but he's also won the hearts and minds of an entire nation. In recognition of his new role as Pharaoh, Alexander visits the famous oracle at Siwa, a journey that will cement his place in Egyptian history. The oracle, located deep in the desert, is one of the most revered religious sites in the ancient world. It is said that the priests of the oracle have the power to speak directly to the gods. And so, Alexander sets off to consult the oracle, eager to learn what his future holds. As you imagine the journey into the desert, the landscape shifts from harsh sand dunes to the oasis where the oracle resides. The heat of the sun is unbearable, but the promise of divine insight drives Alexander forward. When he arrives at the temple, he enters with great anticipation, hoping that the oracle will confirm what he already believes, that he is destined for greatness. The priests, after performing the sacred rituals, deliver their message: Alexander is the son of the god Ammon, and his fate is sealed. He is not just a king, he is a god, chosen to rule over the world. This divine endorsement boosts Alexander's already boundless confidence. From this moment on, he is no longer just a mortal conqueror. He is a living god, a figure whose divine destiny can never be questioned. In the eyes of the Egyptians, Alexander is now both king and god. This divine proclamation has profound implications. Alexander's relationship with his soldiers, his subjects, and even his enemies shifts. His men, already loyal to him, now view him with reverence. In the ancient world, where kings were often seen as gods or as the chosen representatives of the divine, Alexander's new status sets him apart from all other rulers. He is not just another conqueror, he is a divine figure, marked by the gods themselves. His destiny, now confirmed by the oracle, is even more inevitable. The Egyptians' embrace of Alexander is crucial to his continued success. Not only does he gain control of a rich and fertile land, but he also secures Egypt as a cultural and religious stronghold in his empire. But Alexander isn't just interested in ruling Egypt. He understands the strategic value of the region. He sets about establishing a city that will become one of the most famous cities of the ancient world, Alexandria. Construction of the new city begins on the Mediterranean coast, and over time, it will grow into a center of learning, commerce, and culture. Alexandria will become a beacon of Greek influence, attracting scholars, philosophers, and artists from across the Mediterranean world. It will be the home of the famous Library of Alexandria, the largest and most important library of the ancient world, a repository of knowledge that will shape the course of history for centuries to come. But Alexander's work is far from done. He may have conquered Egypt, but his eyes are still set on the Persian Empire, and beyond that, the vast lands of India. The conquest of Egypt is just one step in his incredible journey. As you watch Alexander stand on the shores of the Mediterranean, gazing out at the horizon, you know that the world is still waiting for him. There are more battles to be fought, more cities to conquer, and more challenges to overcome. What's fascinating here is how Alexander, with his military genius and divine endorsement, was able to accomplish all of this at such a young age. He was a ruler, a conqueror, a visionary, a man whose ambition seemed to know no bounds. And though his time in Egypt would be short, the impact of his actions would echo through the centuries, shaping the future of the ancient world. Scientists still argue whether Alexander's status as a god was a self-serving tactic or a sincere belief. Was he simply using divine claims to strengthen his position, or did he truly believe he was chosen by the gods? Regardless, his image as both a king and a divine figure would serve him well in his future endeavors. And as you stand alongside him, gazing out over the Mediterranean, you can sense that this is only the beginning of an even greater journey. The conquest of Egypt is complete, and with his divine endorsement as pharaoh, Alexander stands at the helm of an empire that stretches from Macedonia to the Nile. The world seems to bend to his will, and yet, the horizon is far from filled. Beyond Egypt lies the Persian heartland, where the power of the Persian Empire still resides. Darius, humiliated by his defeat at Issus, is still alive, his forces gathering strength, waiting for a chance to strike back at the invader. Alexander knows that to truly solidify his power, he must crush Darius once and for all. And that, my friend, leads us to the Battle of Gaugamela. You can feel the tension in the air as Alexander prepares to face Darius again. This time, the stakes are higher, the forces are larger, and the battle will determine the future of two empires. The Persian king, with his huge army, is determined to stop Alexander's advance, but Alexander, ever the tactician, has already devised a plan to turn the tide in his favor. The battle is set on the plains of Gaugamela, located in modern-day Iraq, where the vast Persian army will meet the Macedonian forces in one final, decisive engagement. The Persian army, led by Darius, is enormous. Some estimates suggest that it numbers well over 100,000 soldiers, with an additional 30,000 cavalry. Their army is an intimidating sight, stretching across the plains as far as the eye can see, a massive sea of spears, shields, and cavalry. Darius has learned from his mistakes at Issus, and he has assembled a force unlike anything Alexander has ever faced. But despite the overwhelming size of the Persian army, Alexander remains unfazed. Imagine the vast expanse of the battlefield ahead of you. You can hear the sounds of soldiers preparing, the rustle of armor, the clinking of swords being unsheathed. The dust kicks up around you, and the air is heavy with the scent of sweat and anticipation. As you stand beside Alexander, you realize that this is more than just a military engagement. It's the culmination of everything he has fought for, the battle that will determine if his dreams of empire will become a reality or if his ambitions will crumble beneath the weight of a far superior force. The key to Alexander's strategy is his ability to think and act quickly, adapting to the changing conditions of the battlefield. He positions his forces in such a way that he can concentrate his strength where it will matter most. The Macedonian phalanx, with its long sarissas, takes the center, while the companion cavalry, Alexander's elite force, is placed on the wings. But Alexander knows that the key to victory lies in the battle's opening moments. When the battle begins, it's immediately clear that the Persians have the advantage in numbers. Darius, confident in his superior forces, orders a frontal assault on the Macedonian center, hoping to break through the phalanx and scatter the smaller army. But Alexander has a different plan in mind. As the Persian forces push forward, he sends his cavalry on a flanking maneuver, moving rapidly around the Persian right wing. Darius, too caught up in the center of the battlefield, doesn't notice the Macedonian cavalry circling behind him. This move, seemingly simple but brilliantly executed, creates chaos in the Persian ranks. The Persian cavalry, caught off guard, begins to retreat, creating a gap in the Persian lines. Alexander, ever the opportunist, sees his chance. He charges directly at Darius himself. The Persian king, realizing that his position is now untenable, flees the battlefield, abandoning his forces. The battle is over. The Persian army, thrown into disarray by Alexander's tactics, breaks apart, and the Macedonian forces claim victory. You can feel the exhale of relief as the dust begins to settle on the battlefield. Alexander, though victorious, does not celebrate just yet. Instead, he surveys the scene, noting the swift collapse of the Persian army. It's a crushing blow to Darius's forces, and yet, Alexander knows that the battle at Gaugamela isn't just about military victory, it's about strategy, psychology, and the ability to exploit weaknesses when they appear. Alexander's victory at Gaugamela is one of the most remarkable in military history. Not only did he defeat a far larger enemy force, but he did so with stunning tactical precision. By focusing his cavalry on flanking maneuvers and exploiting the gaps in the Persian line, Alexander forced Darius to flee, leaving his army to fall apart. The battle was a textbook example of how smaller forces, when led by a brilliant strategist, could defeat much larger ones. But what made Gaugamela truly significant was its aftermath. The Persian Empire, once one of the largest and most powerful empires in the world, was now on the verge of collapse. Darius's retreat marked the beginning of the end for his reign. Alexander's pursuit of him would continue, but the battle had already crippled the Persian military. The psychological blow was immense. The Persian soldiers were demoralized, their king was in flight, and their once dominant empire was now a shadow of its former self. Some historians debate whether Gaugamela was the decisive battle of Alexander's campaign or whether it was the culmination of a series of victories that gradually wore down Persian power. But regardless of the opinion, what's clear is that Gaugamela was the turning point. After this battle, Alexander was no longer just a conqueror, he was the undisputed ruler of Persia, and the world knew it. It's fascinating to consider how Alexander's reputation for invincibility continued to grow after Gaugamela. To his enemies, he was no longer just a king, he was a force of nature, an unstoppable conqueror who seemed to defy the odds at every turn. His charisma, military genius, and sheer determination turned him into a living legend. But as you stand on the battlefield with Alexander, watching his army move forward, you can't help but wonder, what comes next? The Persian Empire is crumbling, and the world is watching. What will Alexander do now that he has defeated the great empire of Persia? How will he consolidate his power and shape the world that lies ahead? And most importantly, what is the price of all this ambition? Scientists still debate whether Alexander's pursuit of glory was driven solely by ambition or whether he was genuinely seeking to expand his vision of Greek culture and civilization across the known world. Some suggest that his conquest was motivated by personal ambition, while others believe that he sought to create an empire where Greek ideas, philosophy, and culture could flourish. Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. Alexander's impact on the world was profound, and the Battle of Gaugamela is a key moment in that legacy. As the sun sets on the battlefield, with the echoes of victory still ringing in the air, Alexander looks toward the horizon. The Persian Empire is falling, but his journey is far from over. The world lies at his feet, and he's ready to continue his march forward, one battle at a time. With the dust settling from the monumental victory at Gaugamela, Alexander stands at the precipice of history. The Persian Empire is in tatters, its once proud army broken and its king, Darius, on the run. The world is watching, and Alexander knows that now is the time to strike decisively, to assert his dominance across the vast lands he has just conquered. But there is more to this moment than just military victory. The aftermath of Gaugamela sets in motion a series of events that will shape the future of the empire Alexander is building, a vision that will stretch far beyond Persia's borders. The defeat of Darius at Gaugamela marks the beginning of the end for the Persian Empire, but Alexander's journey is not just about conquering territory. It's about securing his place in history and forging an empire that will leave a lasting legacy. As you stand alongside Alexander in the aftermath of the battle, you can feel the weight of this moment. The land around you is littered with the wreckage of battle, the bodies of soldiers, the broken chariots, the abandoned weapons of the defeated Persian army. The air is thick with the smoke of fire and the faint scent of blood. But Alexander isn't looking at the carnage, he's already thinking ahead. His mind is focused on what comes next, the pursuit of Darius, the consolidation of power, and the next steps in his march toward world domination. The first thing Alexander does is pursue Darius, who, having fled the battlefield, is attempting to regroup. Darius, however, is no longer a king with the same authority. His army has been shattered, and his position is tenuous. The defeat at Gaugamela has undermined his rule, and it's clear to Alexander that if he is to secure his hold over Persia, he must find and eliminate Darius once and for all. As you imagine Alexander's forces moving through the vast Persian landscape, the tension is palpable. They are in unfamiliar territory, chasing a wounded, desperate king who is trying to hold on to what little power remains. But Alexander, relentless in his pursuit, pushes forward. He understands that the longer Darius is allowed to survive, the more dangerous he becomes. There's no room for hesitation. During this pursuit, Alexander's army marches across ancient lands, traveling through places that have seen empires rise and fall for centuries. The landscape is vast and varied, from the sweeping plains to the rugged mountains that seem to stretch forever. The soldiers, though weary, are driven by the prospect of final victory. They know that with Darius gone, the Persian Empire will crumble, and Alexander's place in history will be assured. Eventually, after weeks of pursuit, the Macedonian forces catch up with Darius. The scene is set for another confrontation, but this time, it is not on an open battlefield. Darius has gathered what forces he can, but his army is in no condition to fight a battle of the magnitude that Gaugamela presented. In the end, however, it is not battle that secures Alexander's triumph, it is betrayal. Darius, ever the hunted king, is betrayed by his own men. His commanders, seeing the writing on the wall and knowing that Alexander's forces are now unstoppable, abandon their king. Darius is left to die alone in the desert, his dreams of a restored Persian Empire shattered. Alexander, upon learning of Darius's death, is both sorrowful and resolute. He admires Darius's bravery, but he knows that the fall of the Persian king is the final piece in the puzzle of his conquest. With Darius's death, Alexander becomes the uncontested ruler of Persia. The empire that had once seemed so formidable, stretching from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, is now his. The Persian satraps, the local governors, have little choice but to swear allegiance to him, and Alexander begins the delicate task of consolidating power. He marches into the Persian capitals, first taking Babylon, then Susa, and finally Persepolis, the grand ceremonial capital. Persepolis, once a symbol of Persian glory, is now under the control of a foreign conqueror. But Alexander doesn't just take the city, he claims it as his own, using it as the center of his new empire. It is at Persepolis that Alexander makes one of his most controversial decisions. He orders the destruction of the city's grand palace. This act, often seen as symbolic, is intended to both punish the Persians for their resistance and to mark the beginning of a new era. The city that was once the heart of Persian power is burned to the ground, its treasures looted and its monuments destroyed. The message is clear: the Persian Empire is finished, and Alexander is now the supreme ruler. But as the flames of Persepolis burn, you can sense that Alexander's conquest is about more than just destruction. He's not simply wiping out the past, he's forging a new future. His vision of empire isn't one of mindless conquest, it's one of integration. He begins to incorporate Persian customs into his own rule, adopting elements of Persian dress, incorporating Persian officials into his administration, and even marrying a Persian princess, Roxana, as a sign of his commitment to uniting East and West. This blending of cultures will come to be known as Hellenistic culture, the fusion of Greek and Eastern influences that will dominate the ancient world for centuries to come. In many ways, this moment, Alexander's triumph over Persia and the transformation of the empire, marks the beginning of the spread of Greek culture across the ancient world. It's a fascinating example of how a conqueror, though focused on military success, can also leave a lasting cultural legacy. As you stand in the ashes of Persepolis, you can see the outline of the empire that Alexander is building, a world where Greek ideas, philosophy, and art will blend with the traditions of the East to create something entirely new. Scientists still debate whether Alexander's adoption of Persian customs was a sign of respect for the culture he had conquered or a calculated move to gain the loyalty of his new subjects. Some argue that it was a pragmatic decision, meant to solidify his rule in a land that was vastly different from his Macedonian homeland. Others suggest that Alexander genuinely believed in the idea of a unified world, where East and West could coexist peacefully. Either way, his actions at Persepolis have a profound effect on the course of history, shaping the future of the ancient world in ways that would continue to influence civilizations for centuries to come. But as Alexander's empire continues to grow, the question remains, what's next for this relentless conqueror? With Persia now firmly under his control, what will be his next target? And will his vision of a unified empire be achievable, or will the strains of such an enormous conquest begin to tear at the seams of his fragile empire? As you stand with Alexander, watching the world change before your eyes, you know one thing for certain: his journey is far from over. The fire that consumed Persepolis has barely extinguished, and yet, Alexander's gaze has already shifted toward the horizon, where new lands lie ready for conquest. The Persian Empire, once a force that dominated the ancient world, has now been reduced to ashes, both literally and figuratively. But for Alexander, the conquest of Persia is just the beginning of his larger vision, a vision that extends all the way to India, where the ancient kingdoms of the East await his arrival. But before we follow him further east, let's take a moment to appreciate the significance of what Alexander has already achieved. You stand on the battlefield, where the ruins of Persepolis are still smoldering, the city's once proud structures now nothing more than charred skeletons. The Persian Empire has fallen, and its power has been supplanted by a new force. Alexander's empire stretches from Greece to Egypt, and now, it extends into Persia. His soldiers, who have fought tirelessly by his side, now look to him not just as a king but as something more, something beyond mortal reach. With every conquest, Alexander's legend grows. The men who once fought for land and treasure now fight for something greater, the glory of being part of history itself. Yet, Alexander's ambitions are far from satisfied. As you walk alongside him, the tension in the air is palpable. He stands at the threshold of even greater conquests, his eyes fixed firmly on the east. India, the land of the Indus River and the great kingdoms of the subcontinent, is within his reach. The challenge of crossing the Hindu Kush and the formidable deserts that separate him from India will be no small feat, but Alexander has never been one to back down from a challenge. He has already achieved what many believe to be impossible. He has defeated Persia, an empire that stood for centuries. But the battle ahead, against the kingdoms of India, will prove to be his most difficult yet. In the year 326 BCE, Alexander's army begins its long march eastward, crossing the rugged and treacherous terrain of the Hindu Kush. The journey is grueling. The soldiers, already weary from years of relentless campaigning, are pushed to their limits. The terrain is hostile, with freezing temperatures, thin air, and steep mountains that seem to stretch endlessly before them. The soldiers march on, their spirits bolstered by Alexander's presence. He leads them forward, refusing to allow his men to falter, despite the incredible hardships. The landscape around them is stark, mountains looming over the army, their jagged peaks cutting through the sky like ancient sentinels. The journey is not just physically exhausting, it is mentally taxing as well. As the soldiers traverse this harsh terrain, they are forced to confront their own doubts and fears. The prospect of facing a new enemy in a faraway land is daunting. But Alexander, with his boundless energy and unyielding resolve, keeps them moving forward. Every step brings them closer to India, where the famous Battle of the Hydaspes awaits. The Indian kingdoms, however, are not to be underestimated. India, at this time, is home to powerful kings with large, well-equipped armies. King Porus of the Paurava kingdom, who controls the land along the banks of the Hydaspes River, is one such ruler. The Hydaspes is a formidable natural barrier, but Alexander's army, despite the exhaustion of the long march, prepares for battle once again. The army is battle-tested, yet the challenge ahead seems almost insurmountable. Alexander's forces will have to overcome both the natural obstacles of the river and the powerful forces of Porus's army. As you stand beside Alexander on the eve of battle, the river flows before you like a vast and imposing wall. The moonlight reflects off its surface, casting an eerie glow across the water. The air is thick with anticipation, and the soldiers, having crossed mountains and deserts to get here, are ready for the challenge ahead. The Indian forces, though smaller in number, are positioned on the far side of the river, poised for battle. Porus's army includes war elephants, a formidable force that Alexander has never faced before. These massive creatures, armed with armor and wielding deadly tusks, are the ultimate test of the Macedonian cavalry's skills. It is said that Alexander, ever the master of tactics, has no intention of fighting a conventional battle against Porus's forces. The Hydaspes presents a unique challenge, one that Alexander must think through carefully. The river is a formidable obstacle, but Alexander sees it not as a barrier, but as an opportunity. By crossing the river at night, under the cover of darkness, he can catch Porus's army by surprise, attacking from a position of strength when the Indian forces least expect it. The night before the battle, the Macedonian forces prepare in silence. The usual clatter of armor and the murmur of soldiers preparing for battle are subdued, as if the night itself is holding its breath. As you stand there, watching Alexander give orders, you can see the intensity in his eyes. This battle, more than any other, will be a test of his military genius. The soldiers know what is at stake. They've faced countless challenges before, but this one feels different. The odds are stacked against them. But with Alexander leading them, they believe they can overcome anything. As the battle begins, you can hear the roar of the Macedonian cavalry as they charge across the river. The water splashes around them as they swim to the other side, the current threatening to pull them under. But they press forward, driven by Alexander's example. The Indian forces, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scramble to respond. Porus's war elephants charge toward the Macedonian lines, their massive forms crushing anything in their path. But Alexander, as always, has a plan. He knows that the key to victory is not in brute force, but in speed and maneuverability. The Macedonian cavalry, skilled and swift, move around the elephants, attacking the flanks and isolating the beasts from the rest of the Indian army. Alexander's soldiers, though exhausted, fight with all their might. They know that victory here will secure their place in history and solidify Alexander's claim to the title of the greatest conqueror the world has ever seen. As the battle rages on, you can hear the chaos of war, the clash of swords, the roar of war elephants, and the cries of soldiers. But through it all, one thing is clear: the Macedonian army, led by Alexander, is breaking the Indian forces. By the end of the day, the battlefield is littered with the remains of fallen soldiers, and Porus's army is in retreat. Alexander, once again, has emerged victorious. The victory at Hydaspes, though costly, is a monumental achievement. It marks the furthest point east in Alexander's campaign and the last major battle of his career. The defeat of Porus establishes Alexander as the ruler of the northwestern Indian subcontinent, but the cost of the battle is not just measured in lives lost. The exhaustion of his soldiers, the long march across deserts and mountains, and the hardships they've endured have taken their toll. After the battle, Alexander, ever the gracious conqueror, allows Porus to retain his kingdom, impressed by the Indian king's bravery and determination. The two rulers meet, and Alexander, ever magnanimous in victory, restores Porus to his throne. This is the kind of leader Alexander is, a conqueror, but also one who seeks to integrate his conquests into his growing empire. With the victory at Hydaspes, Alexander has completed his conquest of the Eastern world. But what lies ahead for him, and for his empire? As you stand beside him, victorious once again, the question lingers: how much farther will Alexander go? His army, weary from years of relentless campaigning, begins to show signs of strain. Some soldiers even begin to question whether they should continue. But Alexander, never one to accept defeat, refuses to stop. The world is still waiting to be conquered. The Battle of the Hydaspes is still fresh in the minds of Alexander and his soldiers. It is a victory that solidifies his reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders, but it also marks a turning point, a moment when Alexander begins to realize the true cost of his unrelenting ambition. The campaign has taken him farther than anyone could have imagined. From Greece to Egypt, from Persia to India, his empire spans vast and varied lands, stretching across continents. But despite his immense success, there is a growing sense of weariness within his ranks. The soldiers, though loyal, have been on the move for years, enduring harsh conditions, long marches, and countless battles. And now, with the conquest of India on the horizon, something has changed. As you stand beside Alexander, watching his army, you can sense the shift in the air. The sounds of the soldiers, once full of energy and enthusiasm, are now quieter, more subdued. The men are tired of fighting, tired of the endless campaigns, and tired of being far from home. The Indian subcontinent, with its sprawling kingdoms and fierce warriors, was meant to be the final frontier of Alexander's empire. But now, with the victory at Hydaspes still fresh, his soldiers are beginning to question how much farther they can go. You can almost hear the murmurs among the men as they march. Some are whispering about the dangers of the unknown lands ahead. Others are thinking about the families they left behind in Macedon, wondering if they'll ever see them again. It is here, at this critical juncture, that Alexander faces the greatest challenge of all, not on the battlefield, but within his own ranks. His men, exhausted and uncertain, are beginning to revolt. They refuse to march any farther into India. In a famous moment of military history, Alexander gathers his men together, knowing that this is the moment that will define his legacy. Standing before his soldiers, he delivers an impassioned speech, trying to ignite the same fervor that once propelled them to victory. He speaks of the greatness of their accomplishments, the vast lands they've conquered, the empires they've toppled, the history they've made. He tells them of the riches and glory that await them in the lands ahead, promising that if they continue, their names will be remembered for eternity. But as you watch, you can see the doubt in their eyes. The soldiers, no longer inspired by tales of glory, are simply weary. They have fought enough battles, crossed enough deserts, and sailed across enough seas. They want to return home. It's a heartbreaking moment for Alexander, who has led his army to unimaginable triumphs. He has pushed them through thick and thin, and now, for the first time, it seems as though his soldiers are no longer following him with the same zeal. The refusal to march farther into India is not just a refusal to fight, it is a refusal to continue the dream of empire. The vision that Alexander has worked so hard to build, that vision of a unified world stretching from Macedonia to the Indus River, begins to unravel. Alexander, ever the determined leader, refuses to give up easily. He knows that this moment is crucial, not just for the conquest of the East, but for the future of his empire. But despite his best efforts to convince his men, they stand firm. The march to the east, to the land of the Ganges and beyond, will not happen. It is here that Alexander makes a decision that will shape the future of his empire. He agrees to turn back. The men, exhausted and unwilling to continue, are granted their wish. It is a stunning reversal for a conqueror who has known nothing but victory. But even in this moment of surrender, Alexander's genius shines through. He knows that pushing his army any further would be disastrous. Instead, he turns his focus to consolidating his empire, strengthening his hold over the lands he has already conquered. With the decision to turn back, Alexander shifts his focus toward the cities and territories that lie to the west, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and eventually, back to Macedon. He begins to solidify his empire by integrating the cultures and peoples he has conquered, blending Greek and Eastern influences in a way that will leave a lasting mark on history. He plans to establish Greek cities, known as Alexandrias, throughout the empire, ensuring that Greek culture, philosophy, and art will continue to thrive even as his army retreats. These cities will become centers of learning and commerce, spreading Hellenistic culture far and wide, even as the empire itself begins to wind down. Despite the sense of finality in this decision, there's a profound sense of achievement in the air. Alexander has changed the world. He has rewritten the map, defeating the mighty Persian Empire, pushing into India, and spreading Greek culture across the known world. But what will become of his empire now? What will happen to the dream of a unified world that Alexander envisioned? There is an undeniable sadness in the air as the army begins to turn around, heading back toward Persia. The soldiers who once followed Alexander across deserts, mountains, and rivers now march homeward, the weight of their journey settling upon them. They have conquered much, but they have also given much of themselves. As you walk beside them, you sense the mixed emotions, pride for what they've accomplished, but also a deep, weary resignation. The dream of continuing eastward is no longer a reality. But what is perhaps most striking about this moment is Alexander's response. He may have been disappointed, but he is not defeated. He knows that his empire is still vast, still growing, and still capable of greatness. His vision, though altered, is not shattered. The empire he has built is strong enough to survive, even as his army returns home. As you watch Alexander lead his army back toward Persia, you can feel the somber tone of this moment. It is a turning point, not just in Alexander's campaign, but in his life. The realization begins to sink in: his journey, his empire, his conquest of the East, all have limits. The empire he has built is a testament to his incredible willpower and genius, but even he can't bend the world to his will forever. Alexander may have conquered nearly everything, but in the end, it was the limits of his own empire, and the weariness of his men, that forced him to turn back. Scientists still debate whether this moment of retreat was a failure or a recognition of the limits of ambition. Some argue that Alexander's refusal to continue was an act of humility, acknowledging the strength of his soldiers and the realities of their endurance. Others suggest that it was a necessary step to ensure the longevity of the empire he had created. Either way, it marks the beginning of the end of Alexander's journey. The world he built would continue to evolve, but for Alexander himself, the greatest challenge was now behind him. The decision to turn back from India, though painful, is not the end of Alexander's ambition. His army may have refused to march further east, but his vision of empire is still alive, and Alexander has far more to accomplish before his story comes to a close. As you stand by his side, you can sense a new purpose in his stride. The march back to Persia is long, but Alexander has learned from every battle, every challenge, and now, more than ever, he is determined to consolidate the incredible empire he has built. As you watch the Macedonian forces move back through the rugged terrain they once conquered, there's a sense of reflection in the air. The army is no longer just a force of invaders, but a mixed collection of peoples, cultures, and beliefs. The Macedonian soldiers, once separated from the conquered lands, have now absorbed parts of the cultures they've come in contact with. Greek soldiers march alongside Persian and Egyptian troops, and even some of the local Indian soldiers who were once enemies have begun to fight under Alexander's banner. Alexander's military genius is unquestionable, but it is his ability to adapt, to assimilate, that will ensure the survival of his empire. He understands that the empire he has created isn't just about military might, it's about uniting people from different cultures, different traditions, into something larger than any of them could have imagined alone. This is the essence of Hellenistic culture, a blend of Greek and Eastern influences that will continue to shape the world long after Alexander's death. But even as Alexander continues to plan for the future of his empire, there is a dark cloud on the horizon. His health, which had always been strong and unyielding, begins to deteriorate. The long years of campaigning, the stress of leadership, and the countless battles have taken their toll. The signs are subtle at first, slower movements, the occasional cough, the slight fatigue, but they soon become undeniable. Alexander, the king who once seemed invincible, is now facing something he cannot conquer, his own mortality. The signs of illness grow clearer as the months pass. At first, Alexander brushes off the symptoms. He's always been able to recover quickly from injuries and ailments, and his soldiers, who have watched him push through pain countless times, are reluctant to admit that something might be wrong. But the toll of the years is catching up with him. As you stand beside Alexander, the energy he once had seems to be slipping away, and with it, the invincibility that has defined his reign. The thought of death is something Alexander has never truly confronted, until now. As the army moves through the lands they once conquered, Alexander becomes increasingly ill. His condition worsens to the point that he can no longer lead from the front. The once dynamic and charismatic commander, who had inspired his men to follow him through deserts and mountains, now spends more time in his tent than on the battlefield. His health is failing, and with it, the certainty of his empire's future. His soldiers, once fiercely loyal and united under his leadership, are now uncertain about what lies ahead. The death of their king, if it comes to that, could mean the end of everything they've worked for. The idea of Alexander's death is unthinkable to many. His soldiers, who have followed him through countless wars and hardships, can hardly fathom a world without him. They've seen his ability to overcome any obstacle, his relentless drive to conquer everything in his path. To them, Alexander is not just a king or a conqueror, he is a living legend. And yet, the reality begins to sink in. Alexander is mortal, and he is not invincible. As Alexander's health deteriorates further, the question of his successor becomes pressing. He has no legitimate heir, his only son, Alexander IV, is still a child, and many of his generals, the men who helped him build his empire, begin to look to each other for leadership. The future of the empire, which once seemed so certain, now seems to hang in the balance. What will happen when the greatest conqueror in history is gone? Will his empire fragment, torn apart by infighting and division, or will it continue to thrive? In the final days of his life, Alexander reflects on his incredible journey. He was only 32 years old, far too young to die, far too young to leave behind the empire he had built. But despite his young age, Alexander had already achieved more than most rulers could dream of in a lifetime. His conquests had reshaped the world, brought new cultures together, and spread Greek ideas across the ancient world. He had crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, toppled empires, and established cities that would bear his name for centuries. As you stand at Alexander's side during his final days, you begin to understand the weight of his legacy. His ambition was boundless, and it took him to the farthest reaches of the world. But with his death, the empire he built will face new challenges. Who will succeed him? How will his empire hold together without the force of his personality holding it all together? Scientists still debate the cause of Alexander's illness. Some believe that he contracted a fever, possibly due to malaria or typhoid fever. Others argue that his symptoms were the result of poisoning, either by political rivals or even by his own men, who feared for their future without him. But the most likely explanation is that the constant strain of campaigning, combined with the stress of leadership, weakened his immune system, allowing a simple infection to take hold. Regardless of the cause, Alexander's death is a tragic and untimely end to a life that seemed destined for even greater things. As you stand beside Alexander in the final moments, you can feel the tension in the air. The soldiers who have followed him for years are gathering, waiting for word of the king's condition. The camp is quiet, as if holding its breath. Alexander, the man who once seemed unstoppable, lies on the brink of death, his future, and that of his empire, uncertain. The world will soon mourn the loss of one of history's greatest figures. Alexander's death will send shockwaves through the ancient world, and his empire will be divided among his generals. But for now, as you stand beside him in his final moments, you realize that Alexander's journey, while tragically short, will echo through history forever. He will be remembered not just for his military conquests, but for his vision, his leadership, and the mark he left on the world. The days following Alexander's death are heavy with uncertainty, and you can feel the ripple of shock and grief sweeping through the Macedonian ranks. As the great conqueror slips away, the empire that he built begins to tremble. The world that Alexander created, one of vast conquests, cultural integration, and military supremacy, now faces an unimaginable crisis. The future of the empire, once so certain, now hangs in the balance. You stand at the crossroads of history, where the ambitions of one man have created a vast and diverse empire that is now left without a unifying force. At the time of his death in 323 BCE, Alexander's empire stretches across 3 continents, from the shores of the Mediterranean in the west to the banks of the Indus River in the east. His forces have carved a path of destruction through ancient civilizations, and Greek culture has spread far and wide. But Alexander's sudden death leaves a vacuum, a leadership void that cannot easily be filled. His soldiers, his generals, and the peoples of the empire look to each other for answers, but none have the authority or ability to replace Alexander. He was, after all, not just a king, but a force of nature, a living legend whose personal charisma and military genius had kept the empire united. As you walk through the encampment after his death, you can feel the tension hanging in the air. The soldiers are silent, some whispering among themselves, others lost in thought. The Macedonian generals, who have long been Alexander's closest companions, gather together, trying to figure out what comes next. They are powerful men, each having played a crucial role in the empire's success. Men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus, who have served Alexander loyally through thick and thin, now find themselves at a crossroads. What will become of the empire? Who will lead? And, perhaps most troubling of all, how will they keep control of the territories they've conquered? Without Alexander, the empire begins to fragment. The generals, once united in their loyalty to the king, now turn on each other, each vying for control over a piece of the vast territory that Alexander's conquests have created. The question of succession is not just a political matter, it's a matter of survival. As the news of Alexander's death spreads, the once unified army is now filled with uncertainty. Each general claims a piece of the empire as their own, and the unity that Alexander instilled in his forces begins to crumble. The first major struggle for control occurs over the cities that Alexander had established, particularly the mighty city of Babylon. It is here, in the heart of the empire, that the generals begin to stake their claims, each maneuvering to gain the favor of the army, the people, and the satraps, local rulers, who were left in charge of the provinces. But despite the efforts of the generals to hold the empire together, it soon becomes clear that Alexander's grand vision is unsustainable. Without the strength of his leadership and the cohesion he brought to the diverse peoples under his rule, the empire begins to fracture. At the heart of this fragmentation is the issue of succession. Alexander, despite his accomplishments, never named a clear heir. His son, Alexander IV, was born after his death and was still a child, far too young to inherit such a vast empire. The result is a power struggle between the generals and the regents who are left to govern in the name of Alexander's infant son. For a time, the empire is divided into several territories, each ruled by one of Alexander's closest companions. One of the most famous consequences of Alexander's death is the Wars of the Diadochi, a series of battles fought between his generals over control of the empire. These wars, lasting decades, tear the empire apart, with each general trying to carve out their own piece of the once great Macedonian domain. The empire that Alexander had built, one that stretched from Greece to India, is slowly eaten away by internal strife. The great cities of the empire, Alexandria, Babylon, Persepolis, are contested, as the generals fight to secure their power. Yet, amid all the political chaos and division, there is one undeniable truth: Alexander's legacy endures. Despite the collapse of his empire, the impact of his conquests is lasting. The Hellenistic culture he spread, through the establishment of cities, the integration of Greek ideas, and the blending of East and West, continues to influence the ancient world for centuries to come. The Greek language becomes the lingua franca of the regions he conquered, and Greek ideas in art, philosophy, and science take root in places as far away as Egypt and India. As the years pass, you begin to realize that Alexander's greatest triumph may not have been his military victories or the empire he left behind. It was the cultural legacy he created, one that would continue to shape the course of history long after his death. The spread of Hellenistic culture would lay the foundation for the Roman Empire, and its influence would be felt in the development of Western civilization, in everything from art to philosophy to governance. But even with the spread of Greek culture, the question remains: what happened to the empire Alexander left behind? The generals who fought for control, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and others, would eventually carve out their own kingdoms, ruling over the territories Alexander had conquered. These successor kingdoms, though not united in a single empire, would continue to bear the imprint of Alexander's vision. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy, would become one of the most powerful and influential states in the ancient world. Seleucus would establish the Seleucid Empire, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent. And Antigonus, though his rule was short-lived, would establish his own legacy as one of Alexander's most trusted commanders. The Macedonian Empire, though shattered, continues to influence the world for generations. The Hellenistic period, the era following Alexander's death, becomes a time of great cultural exchange, as Greek ideas mix with those of the East. The cities that Alexander founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, become centers of learning, trade, and culture. The great library of Alexandria, which would house the knowledge of the ancient world, becomes a symbol of the enduring power of Greek culture. Even though the empire is divided and weakened by the infighting of the Diadochi, Alexander's conquests have irrevocably changed the world. The legacy of his military campaigns, the cities he founded, and the cultural exchange he fostered would shape the ancient world in ways that would outlive him. The death of Alexander marks the end of an era, but the story of his empire, its fragmentation and the lasting influence of his legacy, will continue for centuries. The world may never see another conqueror like him, but the empire he built and the cultural exchanges he initiated will leave a lasting imprint on the course of human history. Alexander may have died young, but his influence will echo through the ages. With the passing of Alexander, the world shifts, and the great empire he built begins to splinter. The generals, once loyal commanders under his rule, now vie for control of the lands he left behind. As you stand amidst the growing tension, you can feel the weight of history upon you. The dream of a unified empire stretching from Greece to India has begun to unravel, and what remains is a collection of territories, each ruled by a former general who now seeks to carve out their own kingdom. These wars, known as the Wars of the Diadochi, will drag on for decades, each battle a testament to the ambition and treachery of Alexander's closest companions. In the aftermath of Alexander's death, the question of succession looms large. The great conqueror left no clear heir. His son, Alexander IV, is still an infant, too young to rule, and his half-brother, Philip III, is mentally incapable of holding power. This leaves the generals, once united under Alexander's command, to fight for control of the empire. But without the force of Alexander's personality and leadership, their unity quickly dissolves. The empire, so carefully built, begins to fracture almost immediately. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals, seizes Egypt, establishing the Ptolemaic dynasty, which will rule for nearly 3 centuries. His control over Egypt is marked by both political savvy and military strength, and under his rule, Alexandria will grow into one of the most important cities of the ancient world. Ptolemy's reign brings stability to Egypt and the surrounding regions, but his kingdom is a fragment of the whole Alexander had dreamed of. He has control over a vital piece of the empire, but he doesn't have the unity that Alexander once commanded. To the east, Seleucus, another of Alexander's generals, takes control of the vast territories that stretch from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to India. Seleucus's empire, the Seleucid Empire, is enormous, but it is also plagued by instability. The region is vast and culturally diverse, and the challenge of maintaining control over such an expanse proves to be an ongoing struggle. Even though Seleucus initially fares well, the empire faces constant threats from both internal and external enemies. Antigonus, a veteran general who served alongside Alexander in his most important battles, lays claim to a significant portion of the empire, including much of Asia Minor and the heart of Persia. His ambition, however, leads him into conflict with other generals who seek to claim their own pieces of Alexander's fractured world. The wars of the Diadochi become brutal, with each general fighting not only for power but for control over the cities, resources, and territories that Alexander had once ruled. The unity of the Macedonian army, so carefully maintained under Alexander, now begins to deteriorate. It is one thing to follow a charismatic and brilliant leader, it is another to follow men who, while skilled in battle, lack the vision and determination that made Alexander great. As the wars drag on, the generals engage in battles that are less about strategy and more about sheer force. The divisions between them widen, and the cohesion that once held the empire together begins to disintegrate. Despite the ongoing wars and fragmentation, the legacy of Alexander's empire cannot be erased. Even though the empire is divided, the cultural and intellectual impact of his conquests spreads far and wide. The Hellenistic period, the era that follows Alexander's death, is marked by a flourishing of art, philosophy, and science, as Greek culture mixes with the diverse traditions of the East. The cities that Alexander founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, become hubs of learning and commerce, where scholars from around the world gather to exchange ideas. The Library of Alexandria, established by Ptolemy, becomes one of the greatest repositories of knowledge in the ancient world. It is here that scholars will gather to study Greek philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and more. The blending of Greek and Eastern ideas results in advancements in many fields, including geometry, medicine, and literature. The Hellenistic world is a melting pot of cultures, and while it is no longer united under a single ruler, the cultural influence of Alexander's empire endures. But even as the Hellenistic world thrives in certain areas, the political divisions between the successor kingdoms create a new set of challenges. The generals who carved up Alexander's empire are left to govern vast territories, but without the unifying force of a single ruler, their kingdoms are often beset by internal strife. The wars of the Diadochi continue for decades, and the once great Macedonian Empire is ultimately reduced to a collection of smaller kingdoms. Some of the successor states will survive for centuries. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, for example, will continue to rule for over 300 years, with the last ruler, Cleopatra, marking the end of the Hellenistic period. The Seleucid Empire, though weakened by internal strife and external threats, will continue to exert influence in the East for several generations. And while the Macedonian Empire is no more, the Greek influence that Alexander spread will continue to shape the ancient world long after the wars have ended. Yet, despite the eventual fragmentation, Alexander's name remains one of the most powerful symbols of empire and ambition. His legacy is not just about the empire he built, but about the way he transformed the world around him. His conquests spread Greek culture across Asia, Europe, and Africa, and the cultural exchange that he initiated will continue to influence the development of civilizations for centuries. Alexander's vision of a united world, though never fully realized, lives on in the fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures that defined the Hellenistic period. It is often said that empires are built on the strength of their leaders, and Alexander was undoubtedly one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. His death, though premature, marked the end of an era, but the world he shaped would continue to thrive. The successor states that arose from the ashes of his empire may have been fragmented, but they were also steeped in the rich legacy of Hellenistic culture. As you look back at the history of Alexander's empire, it's clear that his influence, like his ambition, could never be fully contained. Alexander may have died young, but his empire, though divided, lives on in the cultural and intellectual achievements of the Hellenistic world. The cities he founded, the civilizations he influenced, and the legacy he left behind endure to this day. The dream of a united world under one ruler may have died with Alexander, but the world he created would live on, forever shaped by the conqueror who sought to change the world. As the years pass after Alexander's death, the ripples of his legacy continue to spread far and wide, even as his empire fragments into pieces. The wars of the Diadochi, which rage on for years, may have broken Alexander's empire apart, but they can't erase the seismic impact of his conquests. The successor kingdoms that emerge, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the East, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon, are all shaped by the legacy of Hellenism that Alexander set in motion. These kingdoms, though rivals, all share a common thread: the fusion of Greek and local cultures, a process that Alexander himself began during his military campaigns. In the centuries that follow, the cultural exchange between East and West continues to blossom. Greek language, art, and philosophy take root in the far reaches of Alexander's empire, influencing everything from government to science to daily life. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt, founded by Alexander, become centers of learning, where scholars gather to exchange ideas and knowledge. It is in these cities that the foundation for future Western civilization is laid. The very idea of a unified world, one in which cultures mix and exchange ideas, becomes a cornerstone of the Hellenistic period. But while Alexander's empire may have fractured, the divisions between the successor kingdoms are not absolute. Through wars, alliances, and marriages, the Hellenistic influence remains, and the rulers of these new kingdoms often claim to be the true heirs of Alexander. His name is invoked by kings and generals, and his image is used to legitimize their reigns. Alexander's vision of empire, although no longer realized in the way he intended, continues to shape the political and cultural landscape of the ancient world. One of the most enduring aspects of Alexander's influence is his impact on the spread of Greek culture. Under his rule, Greek language and customs were introduced to areas far beyond Greece itself. The spread of Greek cities across the vast expanse of Alexander's empire, many of which bore his name, like Alexandria, created a lasting cultural legacy. These cities became the heart of the Hellenistic world, where Greek philosophers, mathematicians, and artists interacted with local traditions. In these cosmopolitan cities, Greek ideas blended with Persian, Egyptian, Indian, and other local cultures, resulting in a new world of cultural exchange. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Alexander's legacy is the blending of Eastern and Western traditions. Before Alexander's conquests, the East and West had been largely separate, with their cultures and philosophies existing in parallel, never truly mingling. But Alexander, in his campaigns, brought these two worlds together. The ideas of Greek philosophers, the art of Greek sculptors, and the scientific knowledge of Greek mathematicians spread throughout Persia, Egypt, and beyond. At the same time, Alexander's empire was exposed to the philosophies, religions, and cultural practices of the East, creating a truly syncretic world where East and West were no longer entirely distinct. For example, Greek philosophers in Alexandria began to study and adapt Eastern philosophies. The famous library in Alexandria became not only a center for Greek scholarship but also a melting pot for intellectual exchange. Indian, Persian, and Egyptian scholars visited the library, sharing their ideas and enriching Greek thought. The resulting intellectual synergy led to developments in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and other fields that would influence generations to come. The influence of Alexander's empire is also evident in the art of the Hellenistic period. Greek-style sculptures, influenced by the classical ideals of proportion and beauty, became more expressive and dynamic during the Hellenistic era. This artistic evolution was shaped by the encounter between Greek and Eastern traditions, as Greek sculptors began to incorporate elements from Persia and Egypt. The result was a unique artistic style that fused Greek ideals with Eastern influences, creating works of art that were both innovative and profoundly influenced by the cultures Alexander had encountered. Despite the political fragmentation of his empire, Alexander's vision of a unified world endured in these cultural exchanges. It may not have been realized in the way he envisioned it, a single empire stretching from Greece to India, but the idea of a world where East and West could coexist and learn from each other took root in the Hellenistic world. In the centuries that follow, the legacy of Alexander will continue to influence future empires. The Romans, who would eventually conquer much of the Hellenistic world, adopt many aspects of Greek culture, including its art, philosophy, and government. Roman emperors, like Julius Caesar and Augustus, will look back to Alexander as a model of military and political achievement. The Hellenistic world, shaped by Alexander's conquests, becomes the foundation upon which the Roman Empire is built. Yet, even beyond the influence of Alexander on the Western world, the cultures he encountered, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian, also left their mark on the world. Alexander's campaigns, though violent and disruptive, also opened up a channel of cultural exchange that would lead to new ideas and innovations in art, science, and philosophy. The blending of Greek and Eastern cultures, once so improbable, created a new world where cultural exchange and intellectual curiosity could thrive. As you look back on Alexander's incredible journey, it's clear that his impact goes far beyond the borders of the empire he created. His ambition may have been ultimately unfulfilled in terms of political unity, but the legacy of his empire lives on in the cultural and intellectual achievements that arose from his conquests. The Hellenistic world, with its blending of East and West, becomes the bridge between ancient civilizations and the future of the Western world. Alexander may not have achieved the lasting empire he dreamed of, but the world he shaped continued to evolve. His influence, from the cultural exchange between East and West to the spread of Greek ideas, is felt in the foundations of future empires, in the art and science of future generations, and in the very way we think about the exchange of ideas across cultures. Even in death, Alexander the Great's legacy is alive and well, proving that some conquests can never be undone. The world that Alexander left behind is one of incredible transformation. His death may have fractured his empire, but his vision lived on in the very cultural fabric of the lands he conquered. Even as his military empire crumbled, the idea of a united world, a world where East and West meet and merge, began to take root in a way that would shape the ancient world for centuries to come. The lands of Alexander's empire, once united under one mighty banner, would now be divided into smaller kingdoms, but the spirit of his conquest would linger. The cities he founded, the cultures he integrated, and the Greek ideals he spread would outlast his empire, leaving an indelible mark on history. Though Alexander's successors, his generals and their heirs, fought bitterly for control over the empire he had built, their struggles were also a testament to his success. They fought not only for land but for legitimacy. They understood that, while Alexander might not have left behind a single unified empire, he had created something even more powerful, a shared cultural identity. The Hellenistic world was no longer just Greek in origin, it was a blend of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. And that fusion of ideas, art, and philosophy would forever alter the course of history. As the successor states solidified, it became clear that the cultural revolution sparked by Alexander's campaigns was far more enduring than the political unity of his empire. The cities that Alexander founded, like the famous Alexandria in Egypt, became thriving centers of learning, culture, and commerce. The intellectual legacy of the Hellenistic period cannot be overstated. Scholars from different corners of the world, from Greece to Egypt to India, converged in these cities to share knowledge, exchange ideas, and build upon the foundations laid by Alexander's conquests. In Alexandria, for example, the Library of Alexandria would become one of the most famous intellectual institutions of the ancient world. It attracted the brightest minds in fields such as astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. It became a melting pot of ideas, where Greek scientists and scholars learned from their Egyptian, Persian, and Indian counterparts, and vice versa. The legacy of the library, though destroyed centuries later, is felt to this day in the continued quest for knowledge and the advancement of science. Meanwhile, the influence of Alexander's conquest spread eastward, where Greek culture encountered the rich traditions of Persia and India. The fusion of these cultures gave rise to new forms of art, literature, and philosophy. Greek architecture began to blend with Eastern styles, creating monumental buildings and sculptures that bore the marks of both Greek and local traditions. Likewise, Greek philosophy encountered Eastern thought, leading to philosophical developments that would influence later schools of thought, including those of the Roman Empire and the emerging Christian and Islamic civilizations. Perhaps most notably, Alexander's campaigns left behind a new understanding of kingship. The monarchs of the Hellenistic world, ranging from Ptolemaic Egypt to Seleucid Syria, adopted many of Alexander's practices. They not only ruled with an iron fist but also integrated local customs, religions, and philosophies into their administration. This policy of syncretism, of blending East and West, became a hallmark of the Hellenistic world. In the centuries that followed, this blending of cultures would influence the way that later empires, including the Roman and Byzantine empires, governed vast and diverse territories. But while the cultural legacy of Alexander's empire continued to thrive, the political structure of his empire was far more fragile. His generals, the Diadochi, battled over the remains of his empire for years, and the political fragmentation that followed his death was inevitable. Though some successor states, like the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire in the east, would last for centuries, they never achieved the unity Alexander had dreamed of. These Hellenistic kingdoms, while powerful and culturally rich, were always prone to internal strife and external pressure. Over time, as the Diadochi and their descendants fought for power, new threats emerged from the outside. The Roman Empire, which had been growing steadily to the west, would eventually absorb much of the Hellenistic world. Rome, though it adopted many aspects of Greek culture, would eclipse the Hellenistic kingdoms in both power and influence. Still, the legacy of Alexander remained. The Romans, who would go on to create one of the largest empires in history, saw Alexander as a model of military and political ambition. They admired his military genius and even incorporated Greek philosophy and art into their own culture. The question arises, what would have happened if Alexander had lived longer? Would he have been able to unite his empire, or would the forces of fragmentation have proved too great? Historians can only speculate, but one thing is clear: Alexander's death marked the end of one of the greatest experiments in empire building in history. His vision of a unified world, however, was not entirely unfulfilled. Through his conquests, Alexander succeeded in creating a cultural bridge between East and West, one that would endure long after the political structure he built had crumbled. In many ways, Alexander's untimely death was the catalyst for a new era. The successors who fought to control his empire would continue to spread Greek culture and ideas, but they would also face the challenges of governing a world that was far more complex than it had been during Alexander's reign. Their struggles, and the eventual rise of the Roman Empire, would lead to the eventual rise of a new world order. But as you stand on the edge of Alexander's empire, looking back at the world he left behind, it's impossible not to marvel at what he achieved in such a short time. In just over a decade, he transformed the known world. He defeated one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world, conquered vast and diverse territories, and spread Greek culture across 3 continents. His legacy, both cultural and military, is undeniable, and it will continue to echo through history for centuries to come. What remains, in the end, is the vision of a man who sought to change the world. Alexander's ambition was boundless, and though his empire was divided and his vision of unity was never fully realized, the world he left behind was irrevocably changed. The fusion of cultures, the exchange of ideas, and the spread of Greek thought across the ancient world laid the groundwork for future empires and civilizations. And so, as Alexander's empire fades into history, you realize that his story is not just one of conquest, but of transformation, a transformation that continues to shape the world in ways that even he could not have foreseen. As you reflect on the far-reaching consequences of Alexander's life and empire, you begin to understand that his death, while a tragic and untimely event, was only the beginning of a new chapter in history. Alexander's empire, though divided and shattered, continues to influence the course of the ancient world long after his passing. The echoes of his ambition reverberate throughout the successor states, the cultures he encountered, and the empires that would follow. Despite the political fragmentation that followed his death, one thing is clear: Alexander's cultural impact is immeasurable. The blending of Greek and Eastern traditions, the integration of Greek philosophy, art, and architecture with local cultures, creates a lasting legacy that will shape the world for generations. His vision of a world where East and West could come together, though never fully realized in political terms, finds its fulfillment in the cultural and intellectual exchanges that continue long after his empire crumbles. In the centuries following Alexander's death, the Greek language becomes the lingua franca of the ancient world. It is spoken in cities across the Mediterranean, Asia Minor, and into the heart of Persia and India. The influence of Greek ideas and philosophy spreads to the farthest corners of Alexander's empire, and beyond. The Hellenistic world, though divided politically, becomes a vibrant and interconnected world of intellectual and cultural exchange. The successor kingdoms that emerge, ruled by Alexander's former generals, may never achieve the unity that he envisioned, but they continue to promote the Hellenistic ideals he championed. The Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in the East, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon each contribute to the spread of Greek culture, creating a mosaic of cultures, traditions, and ideas. Through wars, alliances, and marriages, these successor states ensure that the cultural fusion Alexander initiated continues to thrive. But it is the rise of Rome that eventually becomes the defining force of the Mediterranean world. The Romans, though initially influenced by Greek culture, expand far beyond the territories Alexander conquered. The Roman Empire absorbs much of the Hellenistic world into its own fold, but the Greek influence remains. Roman emperors, scholars, and artists adopt Greek philosophies, adopt Greek gods, and emulate Greek architecture. In many ways, the Roman Empire can be seen as the heir to the legacy of Alexander, even though it bears little political resemblance to the empire he sought to create. The Roman Empire, while distinct in its own right, builds upon the foundations laid by Alexander. The Roman Empire, stretching from the British Isles to the Middle East, from North Africa to the edge of the Germanic forests, would carry the cultural torch that Alexander ignited. Greek thought would continue to influence Roman law, politics, and philosophy, shaping the Roman world in ways that would outlast the Roman Empire itself. But Alexander's legacy isn't confined solely to the West. The far-reaching consequences of his conquests also extend to the East. In India, his campaigns opened up new channels for cultural exchange between Greece and the ancient Indian kingdoms. Even though his empire did not extend deeply into the Indian subcontinent, the brief contact with Indian civilization had a lasting effect. Greek philosophers, scholars, and artists would travel eastward, learning from Indian traditions and contributing to the philosophical exchange that would continue for centuries. Alexander's influence would also be felt by the later empires of the East. The spread of Greek ideas through the Hellenistic kingdoms would help lay the groundwork for the development of Islamic philosophy, which drew heavily on both Greek and Persian traditions. The great Islamic scholars of the medieval period would study Greek texts and incorporate Greek philosophy into their own works, helping to preserve the intellectual legacy of the Hellenistic period for future generations. As the centuries pass, Alexander's name fades from the historical record, but the world he shaped remains. The cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, continue to serve as centers of learning and culture. The artistic and philosophical traditions that he spread continue to influence the development of Western civilization, as well as the cultures of the East. The vision of a unified world, one that blends cultures and ideas, may not have been realized in Alexander's time, but it finds its expression in the cultural, intellectual, and political developments that follow. And as you stand at the end of Alexander's journey, you realize that his story is one of triumph and tragedy, ambition and realization, destruction and creation. The empire he built may have been fragmented, but the influence of his actions reverberates throughout history, shaping the world in ways that even he could not have foreseen. Alexander the Great may have died young, but his legacy lives on in the cultures, ideas, and civilizations that emerged from his conquests. As you reflect on his incredible journey, you are reminded of the nature of history itself. Empires rise and fall, kings live and die, but the ideas and legacies they leave behind endure. Alexander's empire may have been short-lived, but his vision and the world he created continue to shape the course of history, forever immortalizing him as one of the greatest conquerors the world has ever known. Now, with the weight of history settling around you, there's a sense of peace in knowing that Alexander's journey, though tragic, will never truly end. The world he shaped, the legacy he left behind, will echo through the ages, reminding us all of the power of vision, ambition, and the pursuit of greatness. As you slowly let the story of Alexander fade into the background, the world around you seems quieter, softer. The hustle and bustle of ancient battles, the tension of conquests and empires, slowly melts away into a tranquil peace. The relentless march of time and history gives way to a more serene, reflective atmosphere. Alexander's empire may have crumbled, but the ideas and ideals he pushed forward will continue to influence the future, like ripples in water. Imagine yourself now, far removed from the battlefields, standing in the quiet aftermath. The air is cool, the world at peace, as the legacy of a man who once shook the world still lingers in the spaces between cultures, ideas, and peoples. His ambition may have been boundless, but the world he shaped reminds you that sometimes, it's not about what you conquer, but the connections you make across time and space. Now, as the night deepens, your thoughts drift toward rest. Alexander's journey, full of triumphs and tragedies, has come to an end, but his story, like all great tales, continues to echo in the quiet spaces. Let that thought linger for a moment, gently fading into the warmth of the evening. Sweet dreams. End of script.